Hello again, and welcome to the Strategic Management course. My name is Cuervo-Cazurra, and we are going to be discussing alliances. So let's go deep into trying to understand this particular way of renewing the advantage of a company. What are they? That's the first thing, different types of alliances, how do we understand them, and then how do we basically build an alliance? What is the process by which we achieve this particular mode of company growth? So first thing, alliance, any kind of long-term cooperative agreement between several companies, and they want to achieve something in common. Important thing here, it doesn't mean that they are not going to also have their particular individual preferences, objectives, but there is some level of commonality, and because they need each other's help, and they are going to cooperate, they are going to work together for the long run. This is not just a contract story in which you do this for me, I pay you, and we are done. This is long-term. That is, if you want this common goal, we have been aligned and we are going to achieve this. Competition, which is a particular name. Cooperation among competitors. It's an alliance among competitors. That's all there is. The example, and one, if you want a very clear example, is the development of the vaccine against COVID-19. Lots of different companies trying to get into this space. In many cases, cooperation alliances between biotech companies that had the technology and had, if you want, a ability to create innovation, and pharmaceutical companies that understood the process by which, yes, you have a new compound. How do we test this? How do we make sure that this is both effective and it's not going to harm patients? And then how do we go through all the regulatory process? And later on, how do we produce it at the scale and then end up distributing this? Both sides of the alliance, they can benefit from working together, and they are looking at the long term, and this is going to be a cooperation for them to benefit. And of course, they are learning from each other. They are also having their own particular private objectives. So the idea is commonality and long term. With this, different, if you want, types, non-equity versus equity, and this is driven by, do you put money into creating a new entity, or working with an entity, or are you just basically using a contract and as a way to establish this long-term cooperative agreement? On equity, I'm not putting money, I'm not putting equity investments. Yes, it doesn't mean that you are not putting money. It means that you are not putting money into equity. Marketing alliances. There is co-marketing between Apple and the phone carriers. This is, if you want, at the beginning when Apple came up with the smartphone, and some of them had agreements in which, hey, I'm going to promote your phone at the same time I'm going to benefit from the attention it gets, and people are going to be coming to my company. In both cases, they benefit from this co-marketing agreement. There is money invested. There is an idea of trying to sell both brands to the consumers, trying to build a bigger reputation, a joint reputation from this, and there is a long-term story here. This is cooperation. This is non-equity. In comparison, in contrast with equity, in which you create something new. You put money or you invest in a company that is already existing. And here the idea is that, yes, different participants put the money, and that to some extent gives me, if you want, more stability, in the sense that now we have a company. Now this is basically, there is some decision making in addition to just a contract-based relationship. And example, the Brazilian commercial fridge maker Metal Frio, long term, they wanted to get into the Turkish market, and they basically did it alone at the beginning. Eventually, they decided, let's work with a company that is already established. They do understand the market much better. They have the relationship with the suppliers, with the distributors. They have the brands. So why don't we just put some money so that we can basically get into a joint venture alliance, and then from there continue operating, and both of us end up benefiting. So non-equity versus equity, if you want, is the best way to group them. And then among them, each of them is going to have different types or subtypes. If you want, what are we sharing, or what are we getting into? What are we using? Some of them are pretty much you are getting access to existing capabilities of other companies, resources of other companies. You are trying to benefit from that, and the other company is also doing the same thing. Licensing. What is licensing? I have developed a new idea, technology, innovation. I have created a reputation. There is a brand. So I'm going to allow you to use my intellectual property for a fee. Example, Lego, which is a Danish toy maker. They make the little plastics, bricks made out of plastic. And you have Star Wars, which is, well, they have all the intellectual property on the characters of those movies. They are recognized. So why don't we get into a licensing? You give me the right to use your characters, and I'm going to benefit from people who want to play with those characters in my toys. So from there, you are giving me that access to your intellectual property. Of course, I'm going to pay you some royalties. Then we also have co-branding, in which both of us are going to be working together and try to promote each other. And here is that it's going to create benefits for both. GoPro, which is the camera for sports, and Red Bull, which is the energy drink. They work together to try to basically benefit from the common association to, yes, you have all these sports, and then you have a Red Bull, which is associated with excitement. So why don't we work together? Or Coca-Cola and the Olympic Committee, which for many years have been collaborating in the promotion of that particular sports event. And then we also have franchising. It's not, it's beyond if you want the licensing story. Yes, they give them the license to use something, but on top of that, I'm going to teach you how to use my intellectual property. I'm going to train you on how to do things. It's mostly not just the intellectual property, but also the capabilities I have developed. All the fast food restaurants, many of them, not all of them, but many of them have decided to grow basically using a franchise model in which you have the space, you sign a contract, they are going to basically enable you to use their name, their characters, their colors. They are going to teach you how to organize your kitchen, how to organize the counter, and you're going to benefit from the association that customers have with that particular chain. They come to you not because you, as the owner of the franchise, are well known, but because they are associating that with a particular type of food. And as a result, you are going to benefit from the marketing, the reputation has been built. And then you are going to pay on the basis of, for this privilege, and based on, in some cases, percentage of revenues and profits. Then what we also have is going to be, yes, all of this is, everything is already established. I'm allowing somebody to use it, and we are going to benefit from this. I can also work with others to create something new that is not really existing, the joint technology development, the discussion we had before with the COVID vaccines, Pfizer BioNTech. We have a biotech company. They have a particular marine technology they are developing. We have Pfizer, which is a big pharmaceutical company. This is going to be good. Why don't we just work together and try to create something new? And they ended up creating one of the vaccines against COVID-19. In some cases, we have a turnkey project. I'm going to basically ask you to build something to my specifications, and you are going to build it so that I can just start that project right away. That's why it's called turnkey projects. We're working together on creating this. And then we have, if you want, a third set of things in which I'm not just providing the use or the access to existing resources, or we build it together. I'm also providing a full activity for you so that you don't have to do it. The typical thing, strategic, preferred, approved, and these are different levels of exclusivity. Supplier, in which I'm going to be providing you with a particular set of activities, a whole component in a system. Call centers, in many cases, it is external subcontractors, the ones who are running everything for other companies, although whenever you call, they are going to say, hello, you're calling the name of the company you're calling, but they are working for others. or in some cases, the case of Infinity Cars, which are luxury brands. So to bring the association of luxury, they work with both, which is a high-end audio company, so that, look, you have this is the supplier, all our cars are going to be having this, or the high-end cars are going to be having this particular type of audio equipment. And if you want, the flip side of this is the distributors. You are the exclusive, the preferred strategic distributor. You are going to be doing this activity for me. I'm not going to do it. If you are into wines, look at the label, imported wines. You're going to see that there is always the typical thing, wine merchant is the only distributor for the country. And that also varies by geography. In some cases, it's just for the whole country. In other cases, it's by state or so it's going to be the rights that you give somebody to just do that activity for you in a particular location. So all of this is activities. Somebody is going to do that for that activity for us, and this is going to be beneficial for the two of us. Long-term cooperative agreement. All of these are non-equity. We are not putting money into the creation, to the capital of a company. Then we have the set of equity alliances, of which have and strategic investment, minority investments, just a little bit of money going into the stock. It's not going to give me control, but it gives me, if you want, some level of influence. Some years ago, when TikTok was being forced to be divested, or at least the US operations, the US government wanted to be divested from the rest of the world operations. Walmart, which is a big retailer, thought, well, maybe this might be good. I can learn something. So they decided, they offered to basically buy those operations in collaboration with others. That didn't go through, but the idea was, this might give me some influence, some level of understanding what is happening here. I can learn something. Then we have some co-shareholding, in which we have two companies, and both are investing in each other. And in many cases, this is under the idea that, look, a contract is nice, but contracts might not be that stable. But if we have some level of equity invested in each other, that's basically a much more stronger signal that, no, we are going to be working together, and we are going to be working together for the long term, and we are going to make joint decisions that benefit both of us, because if something is going well, that's going to be reflected in that equity that I put, basically gaining more value. For example, the relationship between the French car maker Renault and the Japanese car maker Nissan, in which there were some exchange of participations in the late 90s, which led to a really well-established alliance. The differences, to some extent, gave some instability, because one was basically 43%, the other was 15%, so it's not quite at the same level. But the idea was here, it's a signal, we are committed to continue working together, and as a result, we are exchanging participations. This gives a lot of stability to that relation. And yes, they did have some disagreements later on, but well, that's what happens later on. And then finally, joint ventures. We create a new company. For the most part, in some cases, the company is already created, and we basically split participation. But in many cases, it's just a creation of new companies in which two or multiple companies decide to put the capital and control the firm. The idea here is, especially when it is two companies, typically it's a 50-50. Why 50-50? Because that's also a signal that nobody has the power. Both of us have to agree to our joint decision. So it's basically better if we just have a balanced relation. With this example, and this is the overall, if you want, a Chinese automobile industry, lots of joint ventures between foreign companies and local companies, partly because at the time of opening, it was a requirement that if you wanted to operate in the market, you had to have a joint venture with a local company. And in many cases, that resulted in lots of different joint ventures in here, in which we have the foreign companies cooperating, having joint ventures with multiple local companies and creating cars that basically went into production and then sell in the market. The idea here, equity alliances. I'm putting money into this stock of a company that gives a lot of is much more stability than when we have contracts. It doesn't mean that contracts are not stable, but this is if you want a bigger signal for the external market and also the two partners. So now let's get into the story of the process. This strategic process, alliance between several companies for mutual gain. Yes, why do they fail? Because it's difficult to find partners, because I cannot get the value, because it's not going to work over time. The important thing here to remember is that because it is multiple companies, everybody has to agree to it. So maybe this is the partner that you want, but they are not interested in what you have to offer. You go to another, and then you have to get into the process of negotiating. Can we find common ground and avoid the idea that, well, I'm going to be here only for the short term. This is what I'm going to learn. They are going to be there for the long term. You get into disagreements. In many cases, you might end up with alliances that are not quite that stable, partly because of not only disagreements, but because the final objectives might be different. But the important thing to think about is the process. Even if it is long-term, what is long-term? Well, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. It depends on the industry, it depends on the company, it depends on the need for that particular relationship. But the story is always going to be, let's understand what we need. Let's look for somebody that is going to help us achieve our goals. And of course, we have to get into an agreement with them. There has to be some commonality. Then we create the alliance. And then there might be a point in which we need to exit. And that's not a problem. It means that, well, I wanted to enter this country. I wanted to learn from this company. I have learned. Thank you very much. This is all there is. Long-term doesn't mean forever. There might be a limitation or a particular point in time in which we have accomplished the goal, and then basically there is no more need for this. And then the other thing to think about is how many relationships do we have? How do we integrate them? How do we coordinate them? How do they operate within the portfolio of alliances? So the story. Select somebody. Does this fit within your overall strategy? What are you trying to achieve? What is the contribution you are going to provide? What do they contribute for this? And then can you capture some of that common value that is being created? The next thing is, well, find a partner that is willing to work with you. You don't have the full power, so what do you want to obtain from this? And then think about what are they trying to get out of this, not only for the common good, but also for their particular private incentives. Is it that they are going to learn from you? Maybe you need to be somewhat protective of all your ability to create value, your sources of advantage, because if that's the only objective, hey, you may be just creating a competitor in the future. And then, of course, over time, do you need to basically modify things and adjust as the negotiation progress? From there, you get into alliance. What are we doing? How is this? Clarify, because it is two different partners or multiple. Communication. What are we doing? How are things going as we learn from working with each other, and as the context changes, new competitors, customers want different things. How do we adjust the alliance to basically reflect the new realities, and if you want the new the changes in the common objective? And then how do we make it effective so that we achieve not only our private but also the common objectives for the that particular alliance? And then decide exit, and maybe you can plan for the exit. And it is, if these things happen, this is when maybe we have been successful. If these things happen, maybe that is a problem. That's when we decide that it might be better to exit. And then, of course, this is not just a one-one relationship. There might be relationships with other operations. How does this affect the portfolio? And then also, how does it affect other stakeholders? Companies are complex organizations. They have relations not only one-on-one, which is how we tend to think about alliances, but all of this is integrated with a, if you want, a broad network of relations, how changing one is going to affect the others. And that's the story of the portfolio, which is fit within general relationships. what is success, how we understand success, and then if it doesn't work, how is that not only going to affect that particular individual relation, but if you want a reputational impact on other relations. The last thing you want is to be perceived as, well, that's not a company, those are not managers you should be working, because at the end of the day, they are only thinking about themselves and they basically will abuse the alliance partners. There is an implication in terms of reputation and the portfolio story. So this, to some extent, is a reflection of how things go: the selection, negotiation, execution, exit, and portfolio. It's an interesting story, and these are the different questions to answer, with the overall idea of value creation and renewal of competitive advantage, or sources of, if you want, a competitive advantage. How are we collaborating with others to achieve a common goal? How are we improving? How are we learning? And eventually, success, to some extent, is how do we create value? Yes, but how to some extent we're able to create capture some of that value, not only profitability, or in some cases, in other ways, learning from others, improving, collaborating, getting, if you want, better known by others. There is many different ways of understanding success, and alliances are a mechanism for achieving that success, and especially the renewal of competencies and the ability to compete. So, what's the story? Alliances, long-term cooperative agreements among several companies to achieve a common goal. Important thing, nobody has full control. The idea is that you have to think about cooperating and working with others and making sure that everybody is going to be, to some extent, getting what they achieve and being quote-unquote happy, working and continuing working together. The idea here is not just private objectives, but common objectives, and then how do we understand in the terms of long-term different types, equity versus non-equity, and then depending on what we are going to be using, in whether it's just resources already created, creating new resources or activities, and then whether we are just putting a little bit of money, whether we are exchanging participations or investing in companies together. And then the story of an alliance, in finding the good partners, making sure that things work well, and a process, understand the process, make it strategic, select the partner, negotiate, execute, and in some cases decide to exit, and then how that is going to affect the portfolio. And that's all. Thank you very much.